Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Full Crew. Today, we're going to be talking about counter UAS and some of the hottest topics in that field. We've got some great guests to talk about the topics today, which are going to be an update on the counter UAS authorities, um, some concerns for UK tourists going to France in terms of possible drone threats, and military counter UAS solutions to the wrong problem. So let's go through our panel, starting with Philip, going counterclockwise. So Philip, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello. Yes, I'm a journalist and writer. I have a website called Unmanned Airspace, where we look at how countries around the world are facing the problems of drones, both military and civil, what some of the technical solutions are, what some of the problems are, but also the management of airspace as well, because I think the two can go hand in hand. The way that you manage your airspace, you look after your airspace, and protect it. It's such a fast changing scenario. So that's what we've been doing for the last 7 years. So that's what I've been writing about.
Well, happy to have you on. And we also have Jeffrey Starr, who's been actually on a lot of our podcasts and worked with Dawn on many things. So Jeffrey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Jeffrey Starr. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of D-Fend Solutions. We're a counter-drone company that focuses specifically on RF cyber detection and takeover mitigation. And this is exactly a core part of my job that I love, is basically being a speaker, writer, talker, evangelist on all kinds of counter-drone, counter-UAS issues. And most of my background is exactly on this topic of adoption of various technologies in, in defense, public safety, homeland security, military type of environments. So looking forward to the discussion.
Well, certainly excited to see you again and get your expert opinions on the pieces today. And then we also have, for the second time, because she was also at Dawn's Law Tech Connect, Abby Smith. So Abby, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody. I'm Abby Smith. I'm the founder of Andersmith Solutions. I've spent 33 years, actually now 33 and a half years in aviation, and 33 of that was with the Federal Aviation Administration. Most contemporarily, before retiring, I was the acting executive director for UAS security and led the Detection and Mitigation Aviation Rulemaking Committee, talking about what do we do collectively, federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, and industry, to responsibly implement counter UAS in United States airspace. So, and then I'm a drone lover, fascinated by AAM and aviation in general. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think despite the topic being counter UAS, we're all drone lovers here. So happy to have all your voices to lend to the conversation. And then also anybody in the audience who is watching, feel free to lend your voice in the chat. We will try to get your questions through, and also lend us some good cheer if you don't have a question. Also want to thank our sponsors, Mark 43, Valmont, Aiken, and True Weather Solutions, for making this episode possible. We're going to start off with Philip's article. So Eurostatutory 2024 excellent technical military counter UAS solutions to the wrong problem. So what's the wrong problem, Philip?
Okay, so Eurosatory is a defense exhibition and show which took place in June in Paris, and quite magnificent, fantastic technology there to do all sorts of really wonderful things. And when I was there, I was struck by, when you looked at the counter UAS equipment, they were extremely expensive, probably very good in a local environment. But I got talking to some Ukrainian guys and just saying, look, what is the problem? And the problem is that it changes every 4 weeks. So whatever you think you're protecting against, within 4 weeks, you'll need to come up with another solution. So the speed and the change of the threat, especially when we start talking about autonomous drones, when we start talking about autonomous drones working in swarms together, on the military side is extraordinary. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this in our lives. Just the evolution of what's happening on the battlefield. And poor old Jeffrey, I mean, how you keep up with trying to find solutions to such an evolving threat must be really complicated. And the one thing that struck me also when I was there, and this is why I came up with that slightly contentious headline, is there is a slight bit of complacency. If you spend a lot of money on a counter UAS system and it's taken 3 years to develop and it looks, it costs millions of dollars, you're going to defend that. And there was a lot of feeling that what we have done with the kind of counter UAS systems that we can now put on tanks, we have a passive radar tied to a very powerful machine gun which can bring things down very, very quickly and easily. We've solved the problem. And I don't think we have. And the problem is changing all the time. So even if that particular system works, that's just a tactical problem. The whole drone problem is a strategic problem. It's not just taking out a vehicle, it's taking out the supply lines, it's taking out the logistics, the whole thing. And this kind of worries me, any kind of complacency that we have somehow solved the problem. And I don't want to be too alarmist. In the military, this is state-backed, government-funded weaponry here, which hardly ever, if any parts of it at all, appear on the civil side. But we need to know about it because when the war finishes, there's going to be 20,000 very, very powerful drones out there which can find their ways and filter into all sorts of parts of the world. So it's difficult to be not to be too alarmist, but I think we have to realize that we have to be incredibly agile at coming up with counter UAS solutions, simply because the problem's changing so much. So that's why I wrote the article.
Hey, Mike, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, last week on the show, it came up the cost of military systems and how that wasn't fitting in with the current battlefield in the Ukraine. And I wasn't host, so I didn't get to lend my comment, but one of the things that I've heard is that 3 months is the longest horizon you have for a strategic or tactical advantage for any technology in the Ukraine battle zone. So given all that, I'm curious, Jeffrey, what are your thoughts on that battlefield specifically and the need to adapt counter UAS technologies to what the troops on the ground are seeing?
Right. No, and Philip's exactly right in terms of the constantly changing threat. As a counter UAS solution provider, we call it a combination of cat and mouse and leapfrog, because you have the drone threat, the counter drone threat, then the counter drone threat, and it's never ending. And that's our mission in life, for example, is to stay extremely focused on what's coming next. And that's why systems need to be very flexible. They need to be very quickly and upgradable. They need to be software driven. And they need to, be able to focus on this constantly changing threat and constant capabilities. I mean, Philip mentioned swarms just as one, and exactly also what Philip said towards the end, which is the threats that you see on the battlefield now are the threats that are going to come to the homeland later. So that also has to be kept in mind. So given that, there's a couple of sort of core capabilities. And again, I'm, for the sake of full full transparency, there's many different types of drone threats, and they're categorized and classified, and the DoD and NATO and others put them into groups. You know, a lot of what you're seeing, but not only in Ukraine and other places, is the weaponization of cheap commercial off-the-shelf drones being used on the battlefield. But there's also state actor military drones, and of course, that's why you need a full range of countermeasures and a layered defense, because different counter UASs are for different types of threats. But some of the issues that come to mind based on what Philip raised in that article is, you know, the importance, for example, of not always just defeating the drone, but if possible, if it can be done safely in a way that doesn't endanger forces or the troops, if there's ever an opportunity to capture the drone and not just kinetically defeat the drone, you can also capture the intelligence, which then can help in development of the countermeasures that are necessary. But you have to do it in a way, of course, that doesn't unmask the friendly forces. You don't want friendly fire of the counter drone to hurt forces either. And there's so many drones on the battlefield, including the friendly drones of your own forces, that you have to be able to distinguish between the hostile drones and the and these constantly inbound drones. So those are just some of the challenges that are raised on the military field. You know, you have to avoid not just the collateral damage, but avoid disruption and disturbance of your own communication. So there's multi-layers here. It's very complex. It is going to go from the battlefield to the homeland. And so all of these really have to be countered, as I said, in a never-ending game of both R&D and responsiveness. Those are just some of my initial thoughts to that intriguing article.
Yeah, the time horizon to detection is shrinking from what I've seen. So
and mitigation, detection and mitigation.
So Abby, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, having spent my expertise in the civilian environment versus the military environment, I have lots of opinions, and I think that comment about the shrinking time to detection and mitigation is a really important one, especially when you think about the fact that in the Ukraine, many of the warriors just grab commercial off-the-shelf drones and weaponize them because they need to be agile and they need things that are very inexpensive and that they can grab. And so, yes, I think we have this thing called the internet, which I guess we're on right now, that really lends itself to people sharing information quickly. And thinking about when Jeffrey was talking about the fact that it's coming to the homeland, there have been some instances here in the United States in which Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security have attempted to work in concert with Department of Defense, because Department of Defense can only defend itself counterwise within the fence line of a DoD facility. But and so I don't want to be a spoiler alert getting to my policy discussion. I think it's going to be really important as we think about what are ethical and responsible ways that we can share information on detection and mitigation strategies across military and domestic lines. So, yeah.
You know, what you were saying brought up something that I had heard to the front of my mind about the recent shooting against former President Trump, that the shooter was able to put a drone in the sky, survey the area, got authority to do so with a geofence DJI drone. So I think there's a lot of considerations that go into detection and mitigation that clearly, if this story is true, haven't gone into the domestic side or the civilian side yet. And I think what's going on in Ukraine, as well as that recent incident, should kind of foster more discussion about this, because it will come to the homeland if it hasn't already come to other areas of the world.
So,
Anybody final comments?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think what is very clear is that the institutions that we have at the moment, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, even the Federal Aviation Administration, are just too big and too unwieldy to actually come up with the kind of fast-paced solutions that are needed. And I think one of the things that's happened in Ukraine is that the Ukrainian drone program has not been led by massive Ukrainian aerospace companies. They've been led by a few guys in their garage who come up with a solution, and within 4 days, that solution is on the battlefield. And I think so. One of the things that we're going to have to think about is how we actually get that SME talent, how we get those small groups of very clever people, engage them in the kind of defensive systems that we're talking about, and use that talent, use the talent of young, agile engineering companies, and bring them to the fore in a way we haven't seen before. Otherwise, it's just going to take too long, it's going to cost too much, and I'm not sure we can be agile enough to deal with those solutions. And I mean, for example, and again, talking about the bad guys, and this is a brilliant idea, you can now build a drone out of edible paper, papier mâché paper, which you can eat, and you can put a 3D printed motor on it, fly it into a prison, and basically that can then be taken out. It can be eaten by a prisoner. You can get it in there, and it's gone. And that requires enormously, agile thinking. If we could adapt some of that thinking to the protection of civilians rather than the opposite, then that's one of the solutions. So one of the solutions has to be to get this talent as soon as we can out of the small companies and into somehow developing solutions to this.
Yeah, so I want to hop in there. So first of all, that makes me hungry. But secondly, one of the things I just want to honor and also kind of double down on is no one believes it's the role of large government institutions to be the innovator. Our job is to provide the kind of framework in which agile companies have the ability to innovate. So I just want to, I'm always going to carry the flag of an entity that I love and spend a lot of time in, and I want to be fair about what good governance is and what it is not. So yeah, and can't wait to talk a little bit more about the update on prison in a little bit.
Well, on that point, Abby, I think we lost you. There you go, you're back. The FAA was forged over years and primarily deals with commercial air traffic. And yes, they've adapted to drones over the last decade. But I'm sure you saw it. It wasn't easy to reconstruct your frame of mind around how the airspace works or what entities should receive authority to fly within it, right?
Well,
and I think the consumer drone yeah.
I was going to say that FAA does a lot more than just commercial airspace and air traffic control. Remember, it's also the regulator for general aviation, airframes. It does operations, and commercial cargo, commercial aviation. So, and then there's a whole airports contingent for building around infrastructure, in which counter UAS is a big part of, or is a growing part of that as well. So yeah, truly it's tough when you take an organization that has a pristine safety record, who's been honored, rewarded, and built its policy around aviation safety of piloted fixed wing personed airplanes, and then say, okay, now we're going to put these little small things in the middle of it and everything's going to be okay. So yeah, it's absolutely a disruptive technology, and I think it's taken some time to kind of figure out what is the right scaling of safety policy of of operational policy, how much space do you need in order for an operation to be safe? Because it's all been around piloted aviation. So yeah, it's been tough. And I think that things are really looking up.
Yeah, the pilot was the big change, right? All right, we're gonna head on to our next article, which I believe is Jeffrey's. So, why should UK tourists be concerned if they're taking a holiday in France? I was just there. It seems kind of safe to me.
No,
So, what should they be concerned about, Jeffrey?
yeah, no, it's definitely safe. And as Philip mentioned, both of us were at Eurosatory on a different panel together a few weeks ago, where we explored some of these issues. So yeah, certainly don't want to overstate the risk here. I think what's interesting about this article is more the topic it introduces. It's kind of a good segue. This article, and actually there was another article about the same time in the Daily Express. And sort of what triggered that, of course, was the upcoming Olympics. But the Olympics is just kind of one example of this whole notion of, which is now reaching, as you can see here, this is not trade press or scientific press or business press or technical press. This is mass media. It's really getting the consciousness of the public about how major events can be protected. So, we talked about the military and the homeland, and one of the important use cases is, of course, major events, or specifically, how do you protect stadiums and arenas and major events from this sort of drone issue, which is just constantly happening, constantly increasing. Just over the past year, I mean, not just looking forward to the upcoming events, but looking in the past, in the US, for example, many NFL professional football games and college games were disrupted and delayed by drones. Last January, it was the AFC Championship game in Baltimore, that there was a delay of game, and I mean that in the literal sense, not in the penalty sense, caused by a drone. And there were a number of, there was a big Ohio State Maryland game, there was a UMass New Mexico game, all of which were, what we say is, okay, drones are entering the arena, and we mean that, in more ways than one. And it's something that's actually been going on for a couple of years now. We're actually familiar. There was a case study a couple of years ago, and there's some, you can find some video and some articles on our website where, for example, a drone disturbed a papal mass, a papal visit in papal mass. The Pope was visiting a country and going from site to site, and then had a mass. This happened to be in Slovakia at a holy shrine with thousands of worshipers and bishops and himself in attendance, and there was interruption of a drone, and they actually didn't want to disturb the event. They didn't want to cause a panic. They didn't want to disrupt the media, but they had to deal with the situation. So they used, for example, this surgical technology to fend off the drone in a way that wouldn't cause panic, or basically to prevent a potential incident from becoming an incident. So, but in the meantime, you have these delays and cancellations of events. This could ultimately lead to financial losses. You have complex security coordination that has to happen in an arena. Dangerous payloads coming into a crowded arena. You have the potential for a mass casualty event, or even just by the panic. And then there's other issues at events, such as illegal streaming of the broadcast, and all kinds of risks. So again, here it's a complex environment. It's a crowded environment. You have a lot of friendly drones in the area doing broadcasting or doing security. You have to and you have other flying objects, of course, like balls and birds and other things that are in the sky. It's noisy, it's crowded. You have communications going on. There's this, it's a tough use case. And then in some cases, as other people, as we mentioned, it might not just be a crowded event. It may also be a VIP protection or like we saw that, recently, the combination of both. So that's just interesting that I think major events are going, which of course under various regulations have different allowances sometimes, and make, for example, in the U.S., major events, often the federal agencies are allowed to get involved in, but you have more and more events that are at the local and state level, and of course they're waiting for allowances and authorities to use advanced counter-UAS technology. So the reason I thought this article was interesting is kind of brought to the masses the whole concept of mass events, stadiums and arenas, playing fields, and how this is really another theater, if you will, for this UAS threat and counter UAS threat and counter threat plays out. And that's what I thought was interesting, just as a use case.
Yeah, in most cases, we've been fortunate that it's been the careless and the clueless rather than the criminal, right? So, Abby, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts there. So yeah, I feel really mixed here because to your point, Mike, most are careless and clueless. There are criminals, and there are definitely criminals that are. I was talking with a friend of mine who has another detection company just yesterday, and we were talking about an instance where his product is being used over a state prison in California, and so it's a combination of clueless and criminal. So the criminals will literally, in some cases, get in a car on the other side of the street from the prison, load their UAS, and send the contraband there. And so they get, when they end up confiscating the drone, they have pictures of the license plate, the person loading it. I mean, it's quite comedic. That said, it's not funny because it poses a real threat right now. And again, I don't want to spoil our policy discussion coming up. There's really important policy pieces that need to be figured out, to Jeff's point, at the state, local, tribal, and territorial level, because right now in the United States, and I'd be curious to hear from Philip what it's like in the UK and other places in Europe, what the authorities are for the mitigation piece. We have very clear laws that are put in place for reasons, because UAS are aircraft. Let's make that really clear. Drones are an aircraft by law, and taking over or destroying them is an act of air piracy if it's not done in accordance with law. And so is this a lot slower than all of us would like it to be for the interagency to figure out what the right legislation is and to get lawmakers on board? Absolutely. Is it absolutely important for us to go slow in this space? As you might have heard my dog bark in agreement. Yes, absolutely. We need to be really thoughtful about how we flow down these authorities, because we don't want to disrupt compliant, law-abiding people that have a right to the airspace and to fly. That's all I
Yeah.
feel about it.
I'd also like to bring up the point that even if we grant authority, do those authorities have capacity, right, to actually implement mitigation techniques or purchase something from a vendor like Jeffrey? Some budgets across the United States are thin for law enforcement. So we have some comments from the chat. We got Dawn saying hi. It's great to be watching from the sidelines today. We got Christopher Jenseth. I agree, we need more brains on this. And we got a couple of comments from Mark Ganong. Former Aegis Cruiser CO here. Low RCS, low cruise altitude have challenged USN to respond with $1 billion warships with the onboard system and multi-node defense depth. How does the threat you describe and propose solutions differ from what has been successfully done in the Red Sea? For example, high-end warships and aircraft are likely not a solution. So, Philip, if you want to answer Mark, and then also answer to the article?
So there are huge issues here. There's the issue of affordability, scalability. One of the interesting issues is on the military side, if you see a problem, you can deal with it. Same unit does the identification and does the mitigation. In the civil world, this is a fantastic opportunity for lawyers all over the world now to come in here and start making policy, because there are very few, certainly in the UK where I am, it's the police who have the responsibility for mitigating issues, but it could be the airport, it could be the local authority for identifying that. So you've already, to begin with, you've got a break in the link between identification and mitigation, and that's an institutional problem. And that's an institutional problem to be true in every democracy. And I think every democracy has a kind of issue on how to deal with it, and perhaps sort of learn from each other on how we do that. So at the moment, it's not. It doesn't seem to me that there's one solution to this. I think it's a question of identifying the people who have the skills and the legal background to understand what their responsibilities are, and empower them to work with security forces, police forces, whoever, to actually have as fast a reaction time as they can. Big problem for all democracies. In terms of what's happening in the Red Sea, well, this is becoming very difficult, because what's the difference between a missile, a cruise missile, a kamikaze drone? The lines are being blurred, and identifying
120 kilometer per hour drone is hard to detect and hard to mitigate, and it's essentially a missile.
It is, and you've also got
an RPG on it.
Yeah, it is, and you've also got uncrewed naval vessels now coming into the mix as well. So it needs a lot more thinking, I think, strategically about what the threat is, and again, because as soon as you deal with that particular one type of drone, then another type of drone will come. So we need a lot more intelligence applied to what the threat is going to be, and what is an affordable way of meeting it, because you'll never be able to do everything. You haven't got the money or the time or the resources. So you've got to understand what the balance of probability of the threat is with what's there. And that's very difficult. So I'm sorry, I don't have a solution.
Yeah, so actually, I think this is a good question for Jeffrey. Probability. So how do you map intent based on the type of situation you're dealing with? Like whether it's battlefields or on the home front, clearly you need to separate friendly drones from bad drones or malactors. But mapping or figuring out what the intent of a drone is, it's got to go beyond just whether or not it's squawking, right? So
Absolutely.
how do you deal with that stuff?
Well, and I think there seems to be a common theme here in a couple of the issues that just came up in terms of a greater need for flexibility in a number of different directions. One is, okay, the rules of engagement. So by definition, literally by definition, the first ones there are first responders. And for example, in a federal system like you have in the U.S., and you mentioned limited resources, Michael. The issue there becomes, okay, the federal agencies by definition are only going to be able to show up at the mega events or the the very large high profile events or VIPs, things like that, and that makes sense. But when you think about the hundreds or thousands of parades and high school football games and all kinds of concerts and everything that's going on, it's really a mass distributed issue now. So somehow the first responders by definition are really the ones who can be there, and so that's why you have this initiatives and legislative push to get away, at least on the detection side and hopefully on the mitigation side, and some of it's at first through pilot programs and other ideas, but the more that this devolution can happen, then the more the technology will be able to be deployed, taking into account, of course, some of the issues that Abby raised. Really a big focus on safety and control and things like that. Obviously, not just doing this haphazardly, but really doing it in a controlled way. And I think also, in terms of the cost effectiveness that you mentioned, and not using a jet to shoot a small, tiny commercial drone. I think Don actually wrote an article on it that was where this concept was called counter UAS with proportional policing, so that the ROI is there to make sure that the cost effectiveness is there, depending or commensurate with the threat. And finally, you mentioned, Mike, in the end, yeah, this is really becoming critical, the ability to distinguish between friendly drones and hostile drones. There are many cases now we're seeing on the battlefield and elsewhere where a surprising percentage of drones being shot down kinetically were the wrong drones, were from the side of the person defending against the drone. So that becomes critical, and that's why I think part of the proposals and part of the proposed legislation could allow for things like a proper database of authorized drones, that these could be listed as safe and acceptable for this event or this territory. And of course, now you have remote ID and those kind of initiatives, which help with the identification. Although, again, from our point of view as a counter drone provider, you want to be able to take advantage of remote ID, but you absolutely don't want to be dependent on remote ID, because obviously bad actors are just like a criminal can tamper with a license plate on a car. They can also tamper with remote ID on a drone. So this ability to distinguish and to load proper authorized drones and distinguish between the friendly ones and the hostile ones is absolutely critical. But the technology to counter it has to be deeper than just depending on those positive measures. So that's my sense in terms of getting things, getting first responders more capabilities, B, making it proportional, and C, taking advantage of some of these new technologies and regulations.
So we got a follow-up comment from Mark saying map intent by aircraft kinematics and its response to pre-planned responses, e.g. maneuver warnings, public service announcements, NOTAMs, TFRs. So yes, on the civilian side, all of that is definitely helpful. In the battlefield situation, it can be different, right? So as Jeffrey kind of brought up with one of his examples, it could be dependent on the organization of a force within communicating amongst itself to know even that those are their drones in the sky. So much harder to kind of map, even if you have the kinematics at that point.
So,
right?
so Mike, and this is kind of in response to what you just said and something that Jeffrey was talking about, and it goes to remote ID. There's a new protocol that a team of really smart engineers, that it took me about 4 hours to get the gist of what they were telling me. They formed a protocol that actually is already in compliance with the standard that the FAA adopted for remote ID. What it does is it encrypts not only that remote ID, so that it really is that trusted one. It provides a footprint, and it also masks where the ground control station is. And so thinking about that in a civilian environment where a law enforcement person could use the protocol that the FAA has already developed, that Homeland Security and the DOJ are figuring out how to implement, so that ties that remote ID, and they can say, oh yeah, this is a commercial operation, a trusted agent, or hey, there's nothing here, what's going on? In the battlefield, if you used this protocol that they called DRIP, and which is like the new hip term for looking good, which is kind of, could actually have a real sticky quality to it. It could enable because again, that encryption is only going to be seen by the person that authorizes it. They would know whether or not they're shooting down a friendly. And so, what's going to work in a domestic environment could actually end up being a strategic military advantage if it was implemented correctly. So it just had a little epiphany in my head there.
Yeah, that also brings to mind to me some other kind of signature mechanisms that we already have in cybersecurity. It's interesting sometimes how technology that's widely available in regular computing doesn't make it down to the drone, or isn't well known by drone operators, because they already have a lot of considerations to think about that normal small computing systems don't really bring to fore,
Yeah.
right? So we have a comment from
Actually,
what
I just want to say this DRIP protocol was actually developed by internet cybersecurity people and
makes sense.
is recognized by ICAO as something that would not just be good for remote ID, but could be good for the whole aviation ecosystem. But it was about this very thing that you're talking about that isn't necessarily crossing domains.
And
Yeah, we're
actually,
actually starting to get to this level with firmware, and whether or not a drone can be flashed. So there's ways to do signing systems and encryption down to the hardware level so that you can't tamper with the drone ex post facto after it's been shipped. We got two. Yeah, Philip, you go, and then we got two questions,
Okay,
and then we got to get to Abby's article so we don't miss it.
Because I'm at the Farnborough Air Show in the UK, and every hall is packed with drone operators, personal eVTOLs, big eVTOLs, small eVTOLs, autonomous eVTOLs, piloted eVTOLs. If half of these plans come to fruition, the lower airspace in about 10 years' time is going to be like the Wild West. And the scalability with which these manufacturers are developing and want to build and want to put aeroplanes into the sky, we've never seen anything like it before. So I think we do need new cyber protocols. We need new friend or foe sort of technologies to understand how we're going to police this future, because with so much going on, it's very easy for people just to join this new low level economy and not and they shouldn't be there. So again, I think we need a holistic view on how we're going to manage low level airspace in the next 10 years, which I haven't quite seen yet.
Okay, so quick break to thank our sponsors. Thank you for that comment, Philip. Mark 43, Valmont, Aiken, and True Weather Solutions for making this show possible, and also the audience for participating. They've been very active today, so I guess counter UAS is a important topic to them. So we got Rob Cranston. What type of C-UAS threat detection methods can we start bringing into our commercial operations physical security governance? Commercial best practices, training, and tools would you suggest specific to the security or warehousing of port operations? My issue is the unknown operating capital I need to plan as future expense to operations. Thank you. You guys are all pros and will save lives in the future. So thank you for the compliment. Does anybody have any responses or recommendations for Rob?
So very, very quickly, I think the development of a UAS traffic management system with a flight tracking system is going to solve 60% of the problems in a port. If you have port has its own discrete traffic management system, which can identify everything that's happening and can track everything, then the threat of the clueless, the careless, whatever, goes down hugely. And I think that's another thing which is institutionally is going to be very important, which is the development, and the FAA is leading with this in many ways, the development of UTM systems allied to the remote and network ID systems, and then with a counter UAS system as a final, as the goalkeeper, as the backup. That probably is the way to go, I'd have thought.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Sorry, go ahead, Abby.
No, please.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, you'll see some interface or convergence between UTM and counter UAS exactly in the sort of escalating defense, or it's not really defense, collision avoidance, whatever use case you have. That's important. But in the question though raises it really, and the example was a port. So this is the the whole notion of critical infrastructure protection, and there too, part of we can't really part of the answer to the question about what should I invest in or start training in, that also will depend on how the legislation and regulations work out. Because specifically in critical infrastructure, at least in North America, there's a couple of different ideas being debated. One is, for example, critical infrastructure could potentially be responsible for making sure the equipment is pre-deployed and on site, but the operators would still be law enforcement at whatever level. Or there's other advocates of actually having critical infrastructure have its own abilities to deploy its own security personnel. So it really is going to depend on how it plays out. But I think critical infrastructure in and of itself correctly deserves its own policy and attention, because again, that's also where we're seeing a lot of incidents lately, whether it be electricity substations, ports, harbors, power plants, and more. They're all being challenged by this.
I'm sure we could keep going, but I want to get to Abby's article, so we're going to move along. I'm just going to also call out Mark for providing extra clarity to the military instance. He said in military air defense, you have IFF and secure command and control, such as Blue Force Tracker, and it looks like he got cut off. So feel free to comment, Mark. We'll try to get it in if we have time, but we're moving along to Abby's article, which we have an update on counter UAS authorities. So tell us about it.
So it's pretty exciting. So I worked as the executive director for policy and plans, and then parlayed over into the UAS implementation and drone security world. So this act of 2024 is like really kind of a wonderful to see come to fruition after years of labor and discussions with the Hill, with stakeholders, and really trying to figure out what are some suggestions for good public policy, and then seeing how it came to be. Since we were just talking about critical infrastructure, I want to really start there because one of the things that we were asked to do, what the FAA was asked to do back in 2016, they asked us in this, they call it Section 2209, because we love to put numbers on things and make it really confusing. It was the FAA Extension, Safety and Security Act of 2016. In this section, it talked about protecting critical infrastructure, and it called out some critical infrastructure and then put this horrible catch-all, and anything else as determined by the administrator, which if you're writing public policy, one of the worst things you can do is really give a large discretion, because that forces rulemaking, because that's a democratic process. So fast forward, it's 2024. Do we have a regulation for that critical infrastructure protection, which is basically defense around ports, around electric grids, around nuclear plants, around prisons, around amusement parks? No, we do not, because it was so broad that literally if you took no discretion and said, okay, these are the places, the drone business would be dead. And so trying to balance the constitutional right for people to have access to airspace with protecting people against careless, clueless, and most importantly, criminal and nefarious is a real challenge. The good news about this legislation is that it took out that catch-all phrase, and instead of just saying prisons, because there's a lot of prisons and some of them are prisons for hire, there's a great variety. It said state prisons, and that really helps bound. Now, I know that's not good news for people that run their own, but it really is going to have a tremendous positive impact on the ability for the FAA to complete their regulatory framework and get it out. What I understand is that it for Section 2209 particularly, that legislation or that regulation notice of proposed rulemaking should be out in January. That's the latest that I saw on their website. So anyway, this article talks about a lot of other things, such as the FAA's authority to conduct counter UAS testing on airports was going to expire and has been extended to 2028. So that gives a stable, steady increase as the technology evolves to continue testing to see what can safely be done in that environment. Also, the article talks about the fact that the authorities for Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice run out October 1st, 2024. Now that sounds really frightening because it was an extension because it originally was only till May. What it's doing is forcing other legislation that's really more comprehensive to move forward in Congress. So my guess is there'll be another extension of that because I don't think in this particular election year that they're going to be able to come together in a bipartisan way and come up with that solution. But I think it really will keep the pressure on that we can come up with something that's less ad hoc in nature in this counter space and that really is more holistic, incorporating things like remote ID, geofencing, and then responsible detection and mitigation solutions. And let's talk.
It's finally some progress. Or it's always steady progress, isn't it? It feels like we make big leaps out of nowhere, but a lot of work went into those big leaps. So Philip, what's your perspective from across the pond on all this and U.S. progress in counter UAS legislation?
So we have exactly the same problems, and these are universal problems. And in fact, I was just going to throw this back. One of the big issues which we're just about to face is how the FAA and other regulators start to regulate artificial intelligence systems based on machine learning. So at the moment, So these machines make it up as they go along, and they learn and they adapt and they move forward and they adapt and they move forward again. As a regulator, this must be a complete nightmare because you're used to static things happening, you're used to lots of data, so you can start to make judgments about safety, about certification. Now suddenly you have machines adapting to the situation, and these could be counter UAS machines as well as the threat. So you use artificial intelligence, you can apply that to see what the type of drone it is, what it's doing, whether it's carrying anything, and then immediately have a pretty good idea of intent. But to regulate that, because of the machine learning dynamic issue, must be a nightmare. And I'd love to hear how we can start to look at that, because that is probably one of the keys to solving the problem.
I was just going to say one of the things that has become a term is performance-based regulations, and I think as we look at, it kind of goes to how we've evolved the regulatory framework in the United States from when we talk about aircraft, from being these big commercial entities or even general aviation to these little ones. You have to look at what is the appropriate level of safety? What is the appropriate safety risk associated with it? And so that doesn't directly apply to artificial intelligence and machine learning. However, that said, we need to think creatively and agilely, because taking 4 or 5, even 2 years to get something done isn't going to work in an environment where things are evolving in the matter of days or months.
Just to add on top of that, as far as I know, the FAA isn't going to let anything fly that's dynamically learning. So those machine learning models have to be baked and then performance tested before they're okay. And then in terms of like a lot of, I think people's perception of how AI or machine learning works these days is based on LLMs, and those are they're almost like garbage manufacturers. So like it's just an accident of the context window that they're able to generate something that is sensible and readable. I don't think using an LLM for navigation or anything like that will ever be a reliable source, especially when you have so many more machine learning models that are tested and reliable to actually execute on that. Computer vision is very good. Object detection is very good. Much harder if we're talking for navigating roads than it is the sky, because you have many more options to get out of the way in the sky.
Yeah.
So we got a couple. Was that
Go
Abby?
ahead.
We got a couple of questions I just want to get to, and then we'll give Jeffrey a comment, and unless Abby wants to add something right before that. So we got a question for state prisons who are experiencing drone dropping contraband, which I'm seeing more and more. What will the inclusion of state prisons in Section 2209 mean for them, if not mitigation authority? So that's directly to you, Abby, I think.
So Section 2209 does not address mitigation. Section 2209, let's be really clear, is a fence. And so the advantage that Section 2209, when it goes into effect, will have for state prisons and for anybody that's covered under those particular types of critical infrastructure is that it becomes trespassing. And so right now, it's up to the state prison officials to creatively get a hold of either the operator or the piece of the aircraft. But what this will do for law enforcement is say, this drone is absolutely not authorized to be there. It is doing something unlawful, and gives them authority to act differently than they would have before this goes into effect. And again, that applies for not just a state prison, but for anybody that would be subject to that critical infrastructure. And I think that's a huge piece that goes towards layers. I mean, I think Jeffrey really said earlier, well, no one solution in a counter environment is the solution. I heard someone say there's no silver bullet, and it's a good thing because there's not werewolves either. But you do need to have a layered effect, acoustic, auditory, radar, visual. They're kinetic. There are so many different types of counter effects, and this fence line is just one more piece of the puzzle that creates a safer future.
Hey, Jeffrey, any comments? Are you there? We lost your video feed.
Yeah, I don't know what's happened to my camera. I apologize for that. I keep trying to revive it, but I assume you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
So certainly no, and I just want to build on Abby's point. Exactly right. I mean, what the ecosystem needs and what the industry needs is stability in order to make long-term planning. So and that's really what drives investment and innovation. So the extensions, kicking the can down the road, as the cliche people use, that's very good and that's very effective for national security to at least keep things going like that. But as more comprehensive legislation could be passed, I think that will give the entire ecosystem the horizon to implement policy at all the different levels and to make the investments and to drive forward with technology adoption that will, I think, benefit the end users as well as the first responders and the public sector. So I think that was really a critical point.
Yeah, that is definitely true. Regulatory clarity, although some people fight it, actually makes for fertile soil for businesses to build on. because they know what they can and can't do. So it reduces the amount of risk for their investment. So we got a couple of questions that we can't get to. Thank you, Living L6S and Bill Doyle. Some of those questions are actually answered in the earlier part of the episode, so please feel free to look back. Also, your comments will be here on LinkedIn, so if our guests want to tap into the feed, they might be able to answer to you, and I do implore them to do so. I just want to thank our guests again, Abby, Philip, and Jeffrey, for participating today and providing some great insights. Also, thank you to the audience for being very, very, very active today. I think this was the best this show has ever done. So we know counter UAS is a topic we will revisit as soon as we can. Also want to bring up some things that are going on in the Dawniverse this week. We got Dawn of Autonomy episode 30 with Declan Sweeney of Unmanned Systems Canada. That's coming up on Wednesday. And then we also have a clubhouse coming up early August, I think Thursday next week. So be sure to check that out. You'll see the title cards for that on the way out of the show. That's all we have for today. I want to thank our sponsors again, Valmont, Aiken, True Weather Solutions, and Mark 43 for their help in supporting this show. Makes it possible. And again, thank you to the audience and our guests. We are out here.
Thank you.